potential workarounds until the issue was solved. Well, I don't know about anybody else here, but from my experience with Microsoft products, workarounds were sort of your staple diet and your daily chore. I had plenty of them to get Microsoft products working in my experience. So, but then the other thing is that during the article, it also admits that they're implying that there may be another issue here, not just what they're investigating, and they haven't gone into a lot of detail. The Microsoft have admitted that not all problems may be the same root cause, and it has said that it's still investigating other potential reasons for the fault. So we could have a plethora of reasons and a plethora of faults on the Windows Phone.
Maybe it wasn't ready to be released after all.
That's a terrible allegation to make.
One thing which I find kind of almost contradictory in a way in the reports, they say that the amount of data in some cases for some phones was 50 gigs in a day. For a phone, it's impossible. I don't think. And I had this conversation with a person. I mean, the battery would run out before you can download 50 gigs of things over the network. So that's kind of.
Well, I mean, we said before in the last show. I mean, I'm on, and I'll put quotes here. I'm on an unlimited data plan. Although my unlimited data plan only stretches as far as about 500 megabytes, according to recent reports, which means that if it's leaking. And there's a complaint here which says it's leaking around 2 to 5 megabytes an hour. That means I've roughly got 10 days if I don't use it at all before I'm going to exceed my unlimited plan and get involved with their breach of fair use policy, which means I get sanctions imposed on me according to T-Mobile. And they obviously, just like any other service provider, would run the same system. So
the only thing that came to my mind when I read that same article was. When Microsoft said it only affected a small number of users, and I thought, well, that'll be 10 then. 1% of something like 1% of the user base. That'll be like 10 people then. And one of them happened to be Paul Thoreau. What are the chances?
Especially after reissue, I suppose they're gonna have even fewer. So I'm not sure how many people will just get really pissed off. And they try to sneak out of having to pay compensation for people who were overcharged by far. I'm not even sure what's going to happen with them. But
yeah, I noticed a few patterns, a few regular things there that you could basically stamp out and make out of stone, carve them out of stone. First of all, the regular excuse that every company uses for every problem. Regardless of what the situation is. First of all, you deny it and hope the story goes away, which is bullshit, but they all do it, not just Microsoft. But when you're forced to admit it, when it gets to the stage where you're forced to admit it, the next thing you always say is, it only affects a tiny minority. The vast majority of people are perfectly happy, it's only the tiny minority. And again, Microsoft have done that. They've also said it's an unnamed third party. Well, you know it's a third party. You're telling us it's a third party. Hey, look, it's not our fault, Gov. It's some other guys. But you won't name these other guys.
Because if they do, they go back to you and say it's not our fault. But if they don't rename the party, it's like, well, nobody can actually complain that and say that's not true. And that's the issue. If they name the name of the company would not allow its name to be tarnished. They would fight back. They say, well, we cannot name the party. Well, it doesn't have to exist, You can just always say that.
Well, to round this off nice... Sorry.
The party's called MS.
Well, I would say to round it off nicely, like I said at the beginning of this part, I said about the BBC, and people have various opinions as to what where they're if they have a Microsoft bias or not. And I'll just end for this particular article on what the BBC have ended on. And this is from the BBC site. It's quoted directly, and it says this: Windows Phone 7 was launched in October 2010 to acclaim by manufacturers and users. Did you see any of this acclaim, Roy? I certainly didn't. But this is what the BBC is suggesting.
They pay a lot of money for it to look that way. It's true. I mean, if you can judge by the headlines, things which PR agents were. I have this not just a theory, but just really more of an explanation of how the press works these days. And the way it works, the company would flood the market via PR agents with lots of money to do what they call advertising or PR or whatever. And this money, in turn, is supposed to be used to kind of bribe journalists, and I put bribe in scary quotes, because the way it really works is you don't just do ghostwriting for the journalists who take them out to lunch. I see all sorts of emails from PR agencies. I sometimes expose them and sometimes just ignore them. But the way they work, they have all these little nice strategies of trying to persuade people to post and to do favors to them. And they try to kind of rub you, they basically try to suck up to people and try and use them to be the people who will look like journalists actually pushing propaganda in their papers. And it's estimated about 60% of the articles you see in papers were actually being pushed by PR agencies. So people were actually paid to do that. But they were paid because the company had a budget to allocate to all these PR agencies to kind of distribute the funds around and make sure they get the buzz. So going back to the issue of Windows Phone 7, it got loads of coverage at the time, and I always said, this is paid for. And we know it's paid for because Microsoft said it pays for it, $500 million. Well, expect coverage, but nobody was excited about it. I don't think anybody was really excited about it.
I can't recall seeing any excitement. But then maybe we just missed it.
So I've just figured out where the unnamed third party can come from. If you buy your phone, your HTC phone or your Samsung phone, that's the first party. So the unnamed third party is whoever makes the operating system.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what I was going to end on was, because that wasn't the best comment, because I think the final comment, the last two lines of this BBC article really just sum it up, and it says this: it is considered the company's first credible challenge to rival operating systems from Apple, Google, Research in Motion, and Nokia. And by that they mean a phone that doesn't have tethering, doesn't have copy and paste, and it's now apparently leaking data. And that is considered a credible challenge to Apple or Google, is it? Roy, your thoughts? Credible challenge to Apple or Google?
No, they do have a credible challenge, but it's not the phone, it's patents. And seriously, it is. And this is what they do now. And it's not just Microsoft attacking, they have all sorts of shells and companies connected to Microsoft doing the so-called, the bidding in a way. Doing some lawsuits, especially against certain targets, and trying to extract money and to raise the price and the appeal of Android. And they have all sorts of people whom I call the mobbyists, trying to smear and to belittle and to create scare around Android. I don't really want to name names here, but there are several people, and they're connected to the same people who used to do the SCO case against Linux, trying to say, oh, well, SCO's got a real case, Linux just stole a lot of code, and I saw that code, and they do all that sort of stuff now. They try to destroy the rivals because they cannot actually produce something better. That's the thing with Android. The other thing I was going to say is that, since you mentioned the BBCs, exactly what we said in the previous show about BBC covering tablets and talking to Ballmer as though Ballmer was the tablets guy. He was the expert. He didn't even have tablets. He had things with keyboards on them, so it's more like sub-notebooks. You weren't the only person watching that show, and another person who watched that show made exactly the same sorts of complaints and talked about how the BBC was trying to belittle the Linux-based devices, things like Android, which were really the winners in this case. I mean, they had things all over the place. Even Migo was there on quite a few of the devices.
The only thing I think of when I hear RIM, Research in Motion, is I remember seeing something on Identica about maybe a couple of weeks ago. There's a site called jobs.com, and they've got subdomains for different things. And someone at RIM, I presume at RIM, registered the domain rim.jobs.com.
Yeah.
With that,
I knew, Gordon, from the second you started mentioning this, where this was going.
I just remember seeing that floated past in Identica, and the comment was something like, whoever registered that never actually looked at it. They just obviously registered rim dot whatever, and all these different sites, and rim this, rim that, rim the next thing, and never actually looked at what the URL was going to be when they registered it.
I just got the impression when you started talking, it was going to that level after your first sentence.
Well, maybe it's just the new company. Maybe the CEO of Apple has just decided to create his own company. And he tries to make a success out of the BlackBerry.
The other thing what RIM should do is make like a little portable device, like a little I can hear the giggling. Make a little device, a little really small device that actually clips onto your belt and call it a dangleberry. But anyway.